This episode of Angles is brought to you by Richmond Personal Injury Attorneys. Expect high-level communication, transparency, and cutting-edge technology to keep your case moving. Expect a legal team that's laser-focused and moves fast to get the results you deserve. When the unexpected happens, expect Richmond Vona. Learn more at richmondvona.com, 192 Seneca Street, Buffalo, New York. Welcome to Angles, the podcast where we dig into the stories behind impactful people and explore the sharp turns, daily decisions, and defining moments that shape how they got to where they are and how they keep moving forward. I'm John Richmond, and every week I sit down with guests who are building bold, meaningful lives and careers in Buffalo and beyond. If you enjoy these conversations, please hit follow, subscribe, drop a comment, or share the episode. It's a simple way to help us grow with the community and keep these stories coming. Today on Angles, I'm joined by Sara Heidinger, photographer, coffee shop owner, and curator of creative spaces in Buffalo. Sara's journey has taken her from New York City's photography scene to the streets of the Old First Ward, where she's built Underground's Coffee House, directed the Cast Gallery, and helped shape the citywide creative culture. We're talking about art, neighborhood identity, and the power of turning unconventional spaces into places where people feel at home. Let's dive in. All right, so I am pleased to be joined by Sara Heidinger. Sara, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you being here, and I'm really excited to learn more about you, your background, and of course, all of your ventures. You know, you're a busy person, so we'll jump right into it. Obviously, you are co-owner of Underground's Coffee Shop in the Old First Ward, and definitely going to talk about that. But my understanding is that your background is kind of rooted in photography, and I would love to hear, how that came to be and how the love has grown and evolved over the years.
Sure, yeah. I started more like as I would say like a general artist when I was little. I painted and drew a lot, and I was fortunate that my mom really put some energy into that, and so that led me to taking a lot of art classes. And the Old First Ward Community Center, when I was young and still to this day, is a staple in the Old First Ward and offers a lot of like art programming and after school programming for kids. And so I actually took my first photography class ever there. There was a photographer, his name is Mark Mayo, and he had come into town to photograph the grain elevators. And ended up kind of wandering around, and we used to play in a park near, like, because the grain elevators are like kind of the background to my childhood. And so he took a bunch of photos of us and then realized that it might seem odd that he was like an old man taking photos of like young kids. So we used to have a police station right at the corner, and he went and introduced himself. They sent him to the community center to introduce himself, and the director at the time was like, "You need to teach the kids photography, obviously." So he taught a class, and there was like, I think like 10 of us. We were about 12 years old. And he was just working on a book a couple years ago, and I was trying to find the negatives because we ended up recently reconnecting over through the coffee shop. But so I took my first photography class ever with him when I was like, I don't know, I think I was like between 10 and 12. And I really fell in love with it. And so my mom got me like a 35 millimeter manual camera for Christmas, like a really cheap camera that year. And I kind of became obsessed with it. And then I went to McKinley High School here in Buffalo, which is a vocational high school. And art was my vocation. There's like, carpentry, plumbing, all like the things you think of. And then there's like four that are like kind of left or right of vocation, I would say. So there's like advertising art, aquatic ecology, horticulture. And it used to be graphic design. It's probably digital art now. But so that was my major. And then I got sick when I was like a junior in high school, and I couldn't draw anymore. I later found out I had an autoimmune disease, but my hands weren't functioning well, so I got to be in photography for the whole year. So it was 3 periods a day for the entire year of my half of my junior year, and then the full senior year. And so that's really where kind of my love really kind of flourished and took off, and it became kind of cemented as the thing that I would do for the rest of my life.
That's amazing. It's always great to hear people, especially with the arts, who get that passion when they're young and they stick with it. I think a lot of us, like myself included, I always kick myself over this, whether it's playing an instrument or liking to draw when I was younger. Like I kind of let it go by the wayside. Maybe it's just because I didn't have the passion for it. But what especially once you were getting out of high school, can you talk about how you continued to kind of I guess hone your craft, like grow your passion and kind of where it led you?
Yeah, I would say though, side note, it's never too late to pick something back up.
That's good advice.
Yeah, yeah. And I always think I saw like a social media post about a guy who told his friend he had taken up drawing. And the guy said, "Well, are you any good at it?" And he was like, "If I told you I took up walking, would you ask me if I was any good at it?" Like this idea that we have to be good at art to do it as like a leisure activity is always one I try and get people to move away from because it's so beneficial just to have something in your life that you can be a little creative with. Um, but to answer your question, after I'm sorry, it was what how I went on after high school
Yeah,
with it.
how you carried on with it and where it took you.
Yeah, so I ended up going to UB, and my first year I actually didn't take art. I had kind of convinced myself that at that age that there was no way I already knew what I wanted to do with my life. So I spent,
Smart.
yeah, I spent my first year kind of taking a lot of different stuff. I was like, there's no way this is going to be what I do forever, and I was a little intimidated, I think too, like I didn't feel maybe like I had the training, even though I had spent, a majority of my high school career doing it. I for some reason was very intimidated by it on a college level. And so I didn't do it my freshman year and I just like desperately missed it. So I went back to it and picked it back up sophomore year. And then it was kind of nice. I ended up getting my degree in English and photography. They had like a double degree you could do. And so because that first year I spent kind of wandering, I built up enough classes. So I spent a lot of time analyzing everything, books and art. I can really dissect, a photo, a drawing, a passage. So I got a lot of very analytical thinking skills from my time at UB. But yeah, and so like getting to dedicate, 3 years to like photography most of my day really just cemented for me that it was what I wanted to do. And so I moved to New York City and I worked for two photographers who were just like such a factor in elevating kind of how I saw photography and how I the way that I shoot. So their names are John Dolan and Philippe Chang, and they were kind of credited for changing the wedding industry. They were some of the first photographers in Martha Stewart weddings in maybe like the late 80s. And so they really kind of took it from the like more traditional, like old style where you just like line everyone up and it's like very posed to more of a storytelling, which is kind of the narrative that ties all of my work together now. Like as I look back retrospectively, been doing it for 20 years now. So it was really amazing to get to spend the time with the two of them, like learning how to tell stories, whether it would be for like, a commercial shoot for a magazine or somebody's wedding day or an anniversary. And so I worked for them for about 5 years and it was just invaluable. Like they were so generous in sharing their techniques. And um, John actually went on, he just shot Joe Biden's granddaughter's wedding a couple years ago. And
Wow.
Philippe, I got to second shoot for him and we did a ton of weddings. Like, we did some fun celebrity weddings. I got to photograph like the Princess of Jordan, and we did Catherine Zeta-Jones and Michael Douglas's birthday party, and so like really fun stuff we got to do. And I got to go to places I probably would have never gone to. I like, grew up blue collar on food stamps in the old First Ward here in Buffalo, and so like getting to be at some of like the fanciest hotels in New York City and so I spent a lot of time in the Hamptons photographing events and stuff. And, the takeaway from all that, though, is what I learned as a photographer is it doesn't really matter if you have the most beautiful venue or the most expensive centerpieces or whatever, right? There's like always a story to tell, and they're all equally as important. And I think it's so much fun to be able to pull those stories out of, any space that you're in.
That's amazing. And, I actually myself, I lived in New York City for a little under 10 years. And I don't, do you agree? Like it changes you so much living down there. I mean,
Uh,
I mean, the people you're exposed to, just the city itself, like just everything about it. I mean, it sounds like it had a big impact on you as well.
Yeah, I think, from like just like the way that you function is so different, right? Like from how you buy your groceries to like how you get to and from work, like it's so different than what we're used to in Buffalo. So there's certainly that side of it, but it's just the like amount of people that you get to meet and the types of people. My favorite part about like being on the subway is like you never know who you're sitting next to. Like
Yep.
you could be sitting next to like, I don't know, a movie producer or like a teacher or and it's like I don't maybe you don't talk to that person, but there's just something about that energy of just like knowing that it's your day is just full of, I don't know, surprise and potential. And I always loved walking down the street too. Like anytime somebody looked familiar, I'd be like, oh, I don't know anyone here. And then like later I'd be like, oh, I was a celebrity because those are the only people that like you knew.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I lived in Bushwick in Brooklyn, and then I lived in Sunnyside in Queens. And they were both like just such special neighborhoods and in really different ways. And the apartment I moved into in Sunnyside had been handed down for like 14 years from these Irish girls that had all lived in
Wow.
New York City, like year after year after year. So, it was like really cool to get that cheap rent, but also just like be in this space that housed so many people that came in with like maybe not my specific dream of being a photographer, but like that dream of like going to New York and like doing something, right? And I think everything feels possible in New York, like, right? Even when it's hard, it's like there's so much opportunity there.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, it's like all the things you mentioned, life can be difficult at times there. It's like we don't get to drive and park and walk into Wegmans or wherever you go and then
Yeah,
walk out. It's like everything's a little bit more difficult, but there's something that it's almost like you take pride in it.
yeah, for
Like
sure.
you just enjoy it. Um,
Yeah,
and I want to say too, I love the fact, you were talking about, two teachers or mentors that you had. And I just always think it's cool to hear people talk about that because whether you're, I think we all kind of have those teachers, whether we were really young or a little bit older, who have such a huge impact on people or
yeah.
on you. I think that it's cool for you to talk about that. I mean, it's interesting how meeting people kind of shapes your future and your love for things.
Yeah, for sure. And I really love to give back. I've taught a lot of photography classes at like the Old First Ward Community Center, and when I lived in New York, I taught at an after school program in Harlem, and like you kind of like daydream a little bit about like if what if there's one kid that didn't know that this was for them, right? And like just spending that time with you gave them that gift, and that's really how I feel. I mean, Philippe and John spent a lot of time like I worked for them, but they like nurtured my craft, right? Like they were very willing to sit down and critique things and in like a really helpful, positive way and really encouraged me. Philippe always kind of not pressured me in a negative way, but like he really pressed me to try harder and like see how I could explore things and look at things different. And I credit a lot of that learning I got in that space to where I am now as a photographer.
That's awesome. So you born and raised in the Old First Ward, you go off to
Yeah.
New York City. Um, how did you end up coming back here? What went into the decision?
Yeah.
And kind of walk us through that.
A lot. I had many things happen as people do in New York. I had brought my car with me because I couldn't get rid of it, and so like in a period of a year, my car got totaled and my apartment caught on fire.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm still. If you there was a Bushwick blog, and if you look, I think if you Google like my address, you can still see it. I was at work and somebody sent me a link, and it was my apartment like billowing smoke. Um, and so I didn't come home right after that. I decided that I like we were talking about New York makes you want to like prove that you're tough, right? And so I was like, well, I'm not going to let this stuff take me out. And I was living with a guy and we went through all that stuff together and then that didn't work out. So I had moved into the Sunnyside apartment with the Irish girls and um, I stayed for a couple more years after that, but I was just so burnt out. I was there in like 2007, so like there was that initial like stock market crash, and so I had lost my job at the photography studio. So I went on to work for a safari company. Actually, I cataloged photos for them, Yeah, super random. But like I did like really, they did some really cool stuff. And so I got to make like photo albums for the Bush family when they went on safari, and really random, but very fun. And so, I tried really hard to just kind of like piece everything back together, but it just, when the fire happened, they told us it would take 1 month to repair the damage. It took like 4. So I was very lucky. John and Philippe each had apartments in the city, and then they live with their families outside of the city. So they let me kind of bounce back and forth. And then like my cousin and some friends let me stay. And so I for like 4 months was living out of 2 suitcases and just like moving constantly. And I just had a really hard time recovering from that. And then my friend Frances that I was living with and I were chatting, and she was like, "Well, you could go home and just come back." And it like never occurred to me. I was like, I could just go home and take a break and then come back. Um, which I didn't, but not because I didn't feel like I could. I still worked remotely from New York for a long time, but I just ended up really wanting to kind of participate in like the renaissance that was going on in Buffalo in like the late 2010s.
Yeah, that's
Um,
yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I think you've seen a lot of that, right? I mean, my dad grew up in Niagara Falls. I grew up in Rochester. I didn't think I would move back here. I'm obviously so grateful that I did, but I kind of started noticing that, like just like what you're talking about around 2010, 11, just everything was changing. It was exciting. I mean, it still is.
yeah, yeah.
Um, when you moved back, did you have like a different perception of Buffalo than maybe you did when you were younger?
Maybe. I mean, yeah, it would be silly to think I didn't. I've always loved Buffalo. I always thought Buffalo had a lot of potential. Um, like, the neighborhood I grew up in, I tried to convince all of my friends when they were having kids to buy houses down here, and just like, because it was like, oh, the school system, I'm like, just buy a house in the ward and like send your kids to like private school or something. I don't know, like, but like if we all buy houses down here, like then the neighborhood stays, and like it's like we're the next generation of it. And so I always kind of had this like maybe half glass full kind of thought about like the potential. Even in my photography, like I really love photographing like old kind of falling down buildings, and then like or like watching the progress of things come from like rubbish to like good stuff, like I don't know, there's like certain parks that have been redeveloped around here that I have photos of from like the early 2000s that were like literally like full of trash, and now they're these beautiful parks that everyone uses. So it's just kind of like the way that my brain works. Like I see the potential in a lot of things. But I worked at the Swanee House before I moved to New York City as a bartender, and so like another mentor in my life is Rick Smith, and I met him when I bartended, and him and a couple of other guys used to come in on like Saturday afternoons after work. And so when I was moving to New York, he said to me, "Move to New York and like soak everything up that you can, and then bring something back to Buffalo that's like not here." And I was like, "I don't want to do that. I want to just go. I want to like see the world, and it's like, and at the time I really just wanted to like go and do whatever I could and anywhere, I wanted to be anywhere else. But not because I like hated Buffalo or thought it, you know, I think it's important for people to experience other things, right? Because you only know what you know. So if you never see anything else, then that's the only thing that you know, right? And I find that it's most people that have spent a little time out of Buffalo that see it in a light with like this special potential a little bit more than maybe people that have never left it. In my experience, especially like in the early like 2010s when like things were still kind of a little bit downtrodden.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I was fortunate to I wanted to go away, but I was pushed away. My parents were like, not pushed away, but like, my parents were like, hey, go explore and come back. And
Yeah.
you start to appreciate it even more, Western New
Hmm.
York when you lived other places. And it doesn't mean you don't have these great experiences other places, but then you come back and like you said, like, wow, like maybe I would have an opportunity to bring something new here or do something different that would help the community. And the people here are second to none. They're
Yeah.
amazing people. So you come back, you have this fresh perspective, and everything you've kind of gone through in New York, you're more resilient. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear the origin story behind Underground's coffee and kind of how all that came to be.
Yeah, sure. I moved back and I moved into an apartment in the first ward. Before I left Buffalo, I lived in a few other neighborhoods, but I just like, this is I love being in the old first ward. It's I feel most at home here. I feel very safe here. I know most people. I know my current neighbors. Their daughter and I have been best friends, so I've known them all 44 years of my life. And so, there's something really nice about that. But when I moved back, there wasn't a lot. We have Carbone's Pizza, which is amazing. I worked there when I was younger. And then there was always like a handful of bars that had some food. So like Gene McCarthy's, obviously, and Swanee House was around. But that was kind of it, right? So I had just come back from a very walkable space, and I really missed being able to like walk to get a cup of coffee. And so I joined the board at the Old First Ward Community Center, and I became friends with the owner of Jeannie McCarthy's. It's kind of we ended up going swimming together, like for exercise every day uh, at the city pools. And it was like we were in a board meeting and they were talking about bringing the seniors swimming. And I was like, oh, I've tried to go to the pool a couple times and it's always closed. And so he was like, oh, I have the schedule, I swim. And so we ended up we would swim like 3 days a week together. And he was looking for a manager for the bar at the time of Jeannie McCarthy's. And I was like, man, I don't really want to work in a bar anymore. And I was doing my photography, but it just wasn't enough to like, pay the bills. Or like if you think about it, like I can't be a wedding photographer probably when I'm 80, right? So like I need a retirement plan of some sort. And so I thought in jest, he said, wouldn't the funeral home make a great coffee shop? And I was like, yeah, that would be a great spot. And then like 2 weeks later, he was like, hey, I called Peter. Leslie was the owner of the funeral home at the time. And he was like, I called Peter and he said that he just is in talks with someone to sell the funeral home, but it turns out it's someone I know and they said they'd flip it to us. And I was like, oh, we're like really
This is
we're
real.
doing okay, yeah, cool. And I was like, well, I have about $5 to my name and two cameras, so an old Jeep Cherokee. Um, and so we started kind of exploring it, and I had a lot of restaurant experience. He obviously had some restaurant experience as well from owning the bar and like running a brewery and stuff. So like we had kind of that part of the business locked in, and so I had reached out to my friend Bridget, who had worked for Starbucks for, I don't know, like 10 or 12 years. And so initially she was going to consult for us and just help us kind of like pick out the coffees and stuff. And then very quickly she was like, I think I want to like be part of it. Would you guys be interested in bringing me on as a partner? So she came on like shortly after we decided to move forward with everything. And I had bought a piece of land in the Old First Ward like 2 years before that at auction. And so I was able to sell the land for a little bit more than I paid for it. And then, with a lot of sweat equity, because banks don't really like to give you money unless you have money,
Yep.
we were able to get the ball rolling. And so initially we just thought we'd pay homage to the funeral home by naming it Undergrounds and like leaving it at that. I had been to a bunch of wakes there. Everyone in the community has been to wakes there. So we didn't want to like kind of forget the past. That's kind of a sacred space for people. So we thought we'd name it that and that would be like a little nod and that would be the end of it. But we had to go before the zoning board because our parking lot, part of it was still zoned residential because Peter apparently just knocked down a house and paved the parking lot. And when I was growing up, nobody really paid attention to the Old First Ward. We used to joke it was a little Wild West down here. So we had to go before the zoning board to get approved to change the zoning to residential or to commercial because your zoning falls to your strictest zoning regulation. So the whole property became residential because part of it was residential. And so when you go to the zoning board in Buffalo, there's always like reporters that are just like there in general. And so somebody ran a story that we were opening and had said it was an old funeral home. We were calling it Undergrounds. And people in the comments were like, one guy was like, that's disgusting. And then so people just started kind of firing off really funny things. And so one guy said he was going to donate his remains to us. Um, And like I don't know, so there was all these funny jokes. So we have like the cremation station that we named in honor of that guy. But we spell it cream, CREAM, obviously. And we really realized there was like a big space for some really fun marketing based on that zoning board meeting. And that's really kind of where the brand took off for us in the direction that it is today.
We'll be right back after a word from our partners.
After an accident, life can be scary, stressful, tricky. You need Richmond Bona to help navigate the process, because getting a life-changing settlement can not only take time, it can take an emotional toll. The team at Richmond Bona provides high levels of support through all the ins and outs, so you get the settlement you need and the new beginning you deserve.
When the unexpected happens,
expect Richmond Bona.
Now back to the conversation. Is it my understanding that you run all the marketing?
I do, yes, I do all the photography, the website, the marketing.
And everything's awesome. It's
Thank
so
you.
on point, and I see you have a lot of variations like on the logo, and
Yeah,
obviously you're a very creative person.
thank you.
How have you tackled that though? I mean, I don't think it's as easy as people realize to grow a brand through social media or other means, like everything that goes into that. On top of that, you're a business owner, you're doing all these things for the first time. Like,
Yeah.
how did you tackle that?
Without a lot of sleep.
Yeah. A lot of coffee. You had that.
Yeah, the logo design, actually, I'm very fortunate. I have a very good friend. Her name is Justine Miller, and she's here in Buffalo now, but we went to UB together, and she's from New York. And so when I moved to New York, we got to continue like spending a lot of time together, and her husband ended up getting transferred back to Buffalo. So she had just moved to Buffalo again when we were opening the coffee shop. And so she was kind enough to put her wizard design brain to the test. And so she developed that core logo, the original logo. And then I had kind of like, so the thing with the Old First Word, obviously, we're Irish, right? Everybody knows we're Shamrock Run, everybody's Irish today. Like, that's the thing. And so because we had strayed very far from kind of that similar, like everything in the word kind of has some Irish appeal to it. I think it started with the same. I wanted to just do like a one-off for St. Patrick's Day. So she came up, like she redesigned the logo for St. Patrick's Day for me. And then it just got, it's like, I like the layers of things, right? And so with our branding, there's a lot of layers to it. And I maybe too was like dreaming of a big long-term run of undergrounds, right? So it's like if we're going to be 9 in July. So like, it's there's definitely like iconic branding that just stays the same always, but I like to change things kind of often. Like I move my furniture around a lot. I change my hair often, and so like I think for me it's just kind of maybe my personality. But so when I was thinking about like the logo and the branding and stuff, I wanted to create a specific brand identity, but I didn't want to like pigeonhole us into one space. So
Yeah.
the way that we have our logo, it changes for, let's say, like St. Patrick's Day or Pride Month, or we have a Halloween logo, but also like we just redid all of our bags, like our coffee bags, and so as the brand grew, like our first coffee bag was just a black bag with a zipper, and so it was like a body bag.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it was a little subtle, so like not everyone really picked it up, but that was more just a technical. We wanted to switch to a flat bottom bag, but keep the homage. And so I thought, like, what if the afterlife was exploding out of the zipper? And so it's like very floral, and so you just start to think of these things in these layered ways, and so it gives me room to constantly kind of change it and be creative without straying from like that core concept of recognition, I think.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's I was thinking about this, and I was before preparing for this, and I just heard you say it again. You guys have been in business now for 9 years, which, like, genuinely, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's amazing. Before I started the law firm, I definitely didn't understand how hard, not even close to understanding how hard it is to run a business, and that type of longevity is amazing. What have been some of like your biggest challenges in growing the brand or growing the business? I mean, obviously you grew it through COVID. I've read about some pivots that you had to make. Like, what have been the biggest challenges, and what have you learned from them?
I think a lot of the challenges were kind of like the things you expect in business, right? It's like, that business is going to be hard. If it wasn't, everyone would do it. Everyone would be really good at it. And so, there's like, we're in an industry where like employee retention isn't always, like not everyone's going to be a barista for forever. So like employee turnover is something that's always been challenging. We've been very fortunate, our manager's been with us since we opened. And we have a few other employees that have been with us now for a handful of years, and they're like a key component of the team. So those kind of things that just I think like you just generally struggle with when you run a business, right? But I think like the hardest part for us was really COVID, and it was like we had a break-in in the middle of COVID, and so we do a lot of wholesale coffee, and so when all the shutdown first happened, it was like the first day it's like, oh no, we have all these green beans, and then on the third day you're like, oh cool, we have all these green beans, because like everything is shut down. So like our distributors are shut down, and a lot of our wholesale clients were shut down, so it's like we can still produce coffee, right, which is cool, and that'll keep us going for a little while. And then so it's kind of like you come against this thing, whatever the thing is. So this one is COVID, and you're like, all right, I got to figure out how to get over this wall or around this wall. And like you think you figure it out, and then like we had the break in and they trashed the whole place, and they had smashed their windows, so they bled over all the green beans.
Oh,
And so like, and then all of a sudden it's like, not only do I have to get more of that, I don't have a place to get it from that I normally get it from. So like all the blends that we've created, I gotta like resource everything and like refigure out so like that stuff I think is like tiring in a way that's really hard to explain, because it's both mentally taxing and like emotionally taxing, and you're just like, I have to keep going, I guess, or like, at some point you don't, and you make that decision. But so I would say the COVID years were probably the most difficult. And then too, you're asking people that you've trained to make coffee to enforce government rulings. And I actually worked for the government at the time of COVID. I worked for the assembly. And so I get, that governing in a crisis that no one's ever been through is a hard time. And I get that enforcing all those laws was important, but it was like having to run your business and make all these pivots and think about your employees and their safety. And like there was a time where it was just like Bridget and myself, we would split the day and work, so our employees were home. But like, when they started to come back, it's like that's your first priority, right? Like these people that come and show up for you every day, and then asking them to enforce a million new rules a day, or like learning a new rule every week, and then dealing with people that just are, excuse my language, assholes about it. It's like
yeah.
I think that stuff was really, really hard. And like so we tried to manage that space as like, our employees and our health and our safety and our mental health, that was the most important. And so if the business couldn't live through that time, like it was just kind of something we talked a lot about, and we had to accept that that would have been the fate of it. And so fortunately we were able to like get through that. But yeah, I don't know. I think anyone that's experienced like a break-in too as a business, even in your home, it's like it's so violating, and like you
Yeah.
put so much time and energy into like a space, and then within minutes, or like, I mean, they were there for like 45 minutes, whatever, but they had trashed like the entire place, and then it's thousands of dollars and like insurance paperwork. And so yeah, I would say that was probably the most challenging in a 9-year period that feels like just a very challenging time in American history, right? And like world history.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. I mean, I think it's amazing what business owners did during that time, what they were forced to do. And,
yeah,
it's nobody wanted to go through it. No one wants to go through it again. But
for sure.
you definitely become more resilient coming out of that. And it is amazing what people can do when their backs up against the wall. I think that's
Yeah,
something I learned talking to a lot of business owners. It's incredible what you as a human being can do when you're really
yeah,
passionate about something and you feel like you don't have a choice. Like, I got to do this.
yeah. it was also like really amazing. I mean, the community really came together, I think, for small businesses in general. Like we had so many people that ordered. We did like coffee delivery on the weekends. So we would do like, we were just trying to think of all these ways to like keep the volume of business up. And like people just showed up to support us and kind of whatever we came up with. But then there was like, I can't remember the name. Somebody came up, they designed a poster and there was like, I had rows of coffee cups for each coffee shop in the city, and you could buy a poster for like $25. And then they took that money and bought coffee with it, and we made coffee and brought it to hospitals and frontline workers and grocery store workers. So it was like really this like chain, this chain reaction of people just really taking care of each other. And I find that's the stuff that really keeps me going. Like every time I'm in a place where I'm like, the thing that I'm doing is really hard. Like there's usually somebody standing nearby that's like holding you up in some way, and I think that really did happen in COVID. And Buffalo is really great for that, right? Like we are a city of good neighbors.
Yep, totally. It's so true, and it's in times like that you really get to see it.
Yeah.
How, I mean, you're just touching on this, but obviously it sounds like Undergrounds is almost like reshaped your thoughts on community, especially in the old First Ward. Can you kind of touch on that?
Yeah, I don't know that Undergrounds has reshaped my thoughts on community. I think it's allowed me to bring my thoughts on community into a business. Community shops, community shops, coffee shops, I think historically they're gathering places, right? Like third place is a trending kind of way to talk about them. And so like when we were opening the coffee shop, like aside from really wanting a place to walk and get a cup of coffee from, like I just the concept of giving people a space to gather, giving a space for people to like talk and create and like I don't know, we just have such a mix of clientele. Like we used to there was like an older guy that used to come in like every day, and the staff gets to pick the music. So like sometimes it would be like funny Ace of Base from the 90s or like current, But I remember one day he stopped me and he was like, I just love the music that you guys play. And I was like a little bit like surprised by it because it just was so, like he was probably like my grandpa's age, and it's not like music my grandpa would listen to, right? But like the idea that you're just creating this space that people feel really comfortable in, and but like also how is like each business in a community just an extension of that community, So like we try to do community focused things very often. Like we have an art show with the community center every year where the kids, we hang their art and we do like a full on art opening like we would for any other artist. And we sell their work and they get to keep the money, and like, just trying to present them an experience that like they get to feel really special and maybe they wouldn't have had, or like, we live in a bit of a food desert. So the past couple of years we've teamed up with the Mass Ave project, and they one year it was Tuesdays, last year it was Saturdays, would bring the fruit and veggie truck and you could buy groceries like right at the corner. So creating like walkable things that the community's lacking, supporting the community center, right? Because that's already a beacon in the community that exists. And, so we do like a food drive usually around November, December to try and help with the food pantry. And, but like, it's like, I think about communities as like, there's this center piece and we're all kind of rings in it and we're connected to each other. So like, like how do we hold each other up, right? And so and a little bit it goes back to like the photo studio I worked at, like there was the concept that like a rising tide moves all ships, right?
Yep,
It's like
yep.
like just because I teach you what I know doesn't mean that you're gonna take my job. So I kind of live my life that way. And so it really was special for me to be able to create a business that I can continue. That's just kind of my day-to-day life. And so it all kind of really flowed. Like I sometimes when I say out loud all the things I do, I feel like I sound crazy, but they all feel so connected to me that it doesn't necessarily feel like I do a million different things. Like there is that community piece is kind of strung through all of it, through my photography. So I think it's just, I was raised that way. My grandpa, I always say he's like one of those Catholics that's like a good Catholic. Like he lives his life by like loving his neighbor and being kind. And so, he always shared that with us. And, my parents raised us to like give back when we could, even when we didn't have anything, right? There's somebody that always has less than you. And so that's just kind of like a core part of how I operate. And so it was an easy thread to pull through the coffee shop. Sometimes I feel like, in this moment in time, it's like, how can we do more? And so like, but I think that's always a good place to be. Like, how can you be doing more, right? Without like losing your own sanity, obviously. But yeah, I think there's always room to make your community better.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's so important to give back to the community. And I like what you were talking about with, people say, well, you're doing so much. It's crazy. But it all comes, it's like you said, it's all rooted in one thing. Like it's from one place, whether it's that sense of community or neighborhood building, whatever it is. I mean, I think it's amazing. And it motivates you to be able to do all these different things. Like I saw, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was earlier this year, you took a trip to Colombia.
Yeah, it was at the end of last year, but yeah.
End of last year? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's cool. I'd love if you could just touch on that a little bit, because I think it's important. So many of us, we walk into a community coffee shop, you get your coffee, you go about your day. You don't really think about, where the beans came from, what went into like kind of the whole process. And you really took it all the way back to Colombia. And I think you probably learned a lot from that.
Yeah, it was, I love traveling. I am fortunate to get to do it often. I have a lot of friends that live in different places, so it makes it more accessible. Colombia is hands down one of my favorite places I've been. I don't know that I had like any expectations really for that trip. I think like if you think about like New York City or like Paris or something, you kind of already have this like vision of what those things will be or should be, right? And Colombia just kind of spurred out of a and so like, I again like community and networking are kind of like things that just come naturally to me. And so I was at a hockey game with my friend Maura, and she was a newer friend. And she had taught in Colombia. And so I was like, oh my God, I've always wanted to go to Colombia. And, again, kind of like the start of the coffee shop, like sometimes I think I'm just like talking. And then within 10 minutes, she was texting with her principal's wife, who runs a coffee roastery in Colombia and who ended up being kind of our guide for the tour. And so initially the conversation was just like, how do we connect with her and get some of her coffee and the farmers she knows to the shop, and start to have a more direct relationship with the farmers we're using. And then it quickly turned into like, you guys should come here and see everything. And I was like, yeah, that's amazing. And so then we just started kind of planning the trip, and the two girls that own Unapologetic Coffee are friends of ours. And so we were out, we like on occasion we'll go have some margaritas and wine about business things together. And so they, Alicia, one of the owners, was with us, and she was like, I want to go to Colombia. And so very quickly it turned into like a big group trip. So there was like 10 of us that went, and it really, I've always felt a little piece of me felt like I was missing something by not having like experienced the whole process of the literal farm to table of coffee, because I mean, it's such a huge industry. America is one of the biggest, I think we are the biggest consumers of coffee in the world. And there's so many layers to it, right? Like coffee farming is hard. Climate change has impacted it greatly. Coffee farmers have often gotten screwed over in pricing. And, it's just like all of those layers go back to people, right? So like getting to go, we went and stayed on a farm that had been in this family for like, I mean, generations upon generations. I think they said like hundreds of years. And so like they took us in, we stayed on the farm with them. They fed us. They took us out into the field. We dropped their kids off at school. The little boys were so excited. So we like drove into the town, like on the back of their Jeep, and met all their classmates. And, I also learned in that specific moment that a lot of kids in Colombia don't go past like grade school. They end up moving to working in the coffee industry on the farms. And so I think it's important to know where things come from, right? Like things that we're consuming on such a casual basis. and how they really affect other people's lives. So it was really special to get to spend time with this family and to learn about like, their love of coffee and how, you know, everyone's working to kind of continue on the farm and make sure that, people aren't getting taken advantage of and prices are fair. And then also like learning about what they're doing to try and combat some of like global warming things that are happening in their country was really interesting to me, like planting techniques and like using banana trees to shade coffee in spots that maybe used to be like less full sun. And so there was like, I mean, I could go on and on and on about it, but we got to pick coffee. We got to go to the neighbor's place where they wash the beans. We got to go to the other neighbors where they dry the beans, and they had this really cool system. Like they dry it on the roof in the sun, and then they kind of like wheel a thing because it rains a lot at night there. So they just like wheel a thing over it at night. And then in the morning they push that back and it's back out in the sun. And so, I mean, we saw every step of the process to like where it would get packaged and then shipped to us essentially.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and it just makes you like appreciate every part of it more. Like we ate the coffee cherry and like saw how they use all the parts of the plant and like yeah, so it's the coffee industry is like there's a heavy impact by drinking coffee, right? That you just don't think about, and it creates a lot of waste, and it's got to travel to us because there's we don't grow coffee here. Well, Puerto Rico, but and Hawaii is very far.
Yeah.
So I felt like it gave me a much better understanding of the product that I'm roasting, and it really just made me want to, like I actually talked to the woman that was our guide about trying to come back and do a photo project on female farmers in Colombia. And only Colombia to start specifically because we were there and there's like a connection already made. But like just really highlighting the amount of women that work in that industry. And we had learned that there's some danger. A lot of the women that like are in the fields picking the coffee and stuff, like,
Yep.
they encounter some not so nice scenarios. And so that was an interesting, sadder side of things to learn about. But so the photographer and storyteller in me immediately was like, it would be really special to elevate this story too, right? Like,
Yep.
um,
Well, I hope you
but
do it.
thanks. Yeah, I've applied for a few grants to try and make it happen. So we'll see if it's something I can bring to light. But yeah, I just, it's like everyone has a story, whether you just wake up and brush your teeth and go to work every day, or a coffee farmer in Colombia, or an attorney in Buffalo. Like we all have stories, and we're all like a piece of this greater fabric. And so like, yeah,
No,
just
yeah.
all.
No, I agree. And, I actually want to now touch on a different part of your story because we were talking in the beginning about obviously you're an artist.
Yeah.
That's almost like first and foremost. And can you talk about the Cast Project?
Yeah, so the Cats Gallery is located at 500 Seneca, and it's now I've kind of broken it off into two spaces, but the main space is the main entrance to the building. It's off the Spring Street side of the building, and the Severino company is amazing, and they are big, big supporters of art. They're a big supporter of me, and so I was in another building in the Old First Ward that had it's since gotten redeveloped. But so there's about 25 of us in the building, and we tried to meet with the developer and talk about staying, and it just didn't work. And I mean, they had to redo the whole building, so we all had to leave. And they offered us arrangements to come back, but construction at the time was planned for 2 years. It's hard to run your business for 2 years out of a mystery space and then bring it back. It turned into much longer because of COVID too. So I had done some photography of 500 Seneca when it was under construction. I met Sam right after I moved back to Buffalo, and so he took me on like a tour of the building because like I said earlier, I love photographing like construction, deconstruction, reconstruction. And so he took me around and I did all these photos of the building. And he had mentioned that he really wanted to have art in the building from like local art, like hyper local, like to the area, like Old First Ward. And so we went on this tour. I took photos of the building and he was like, when we're ready to like decorate, I'll reach back out to you and we'll buy some of your photos. And I was kind of like, yeah, okay, like that's been a long time down the road. And then sure enough, like that time came and he reached out to me with the building manager, Luke, who I love so much. And he's just lovely to work with. And so they bought some of my photography. It's on like the third and the fifth floor. And so I'd kind of developed a working relationship with them. I photographed like the ribbon cutting of the building and some other things. And so when I had to move studios, I really wanted to stay in the Old First Ward, and I was trying to navigate like, how do I stay? But there's not really anywhere to have a studio because it's mostly houses. And so I called them and asked if I could rent a one-bedroom apartment and use it as like my apartment and my studio. And so Luke was like, well, you could, but like, do you want to bring like your customers into like the tenant area and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, how about instead, do you want to run the gallery space in exchange for a studio? And I was like, that's kind of a no-brainer. So they offered me at where I've been ever since. So I think I've been there for like 6 or 7 years now. So I have an office in 500 Seneca that I use for my photography business. In exchange, I produce shows in the front lobby of the building. And then I split the year, though. Half the year used to be split with the UB Arts Collaboratory. So a student got to live in the building and they would have to either create art for the space or show other artists. And that is no longer a program at UB anymore. So now the SEPA Gallery has an artist in resident that lives in 500 Seneca. And so they manage the gallery half of the year. So, I mean, I think it's a huge service to obviously myself and the other artists, but like the art community in general, just like creating that space for art. And, I probably wouldn't have been able to have a studio in the neighborhood unless I like bought a house and put it in my house, which at that time I was just not, it wasn't an option. So yeah, I've shown artists now for about 6 years. Which has been really cool. There's an artist up right now. Her name is Emma Breton, and her show is called Small Wonders. So if this comes out before the 23rd, I'm not sure that it will, but she's doing an artist talk. And so I try and, extend the space in the same vein how it was extended to me. I like to show artists that are either like trying to build their resume, whether you're young or old and just getting into art or getting back into art. It's like when you try and get a job out of college and you can't get a job because you don't have any work experience.
Yep.
Getting into galleries feels a little bit the same. Like if you've not shown in a gallery, you can't always get into a gallery, right? Or like to get other grants and stuff, you need to have work on your resume. So I love to try and create a space for people that are trying to build up their career a little bit, or or like trying something new maybe, or just yeah. So it's kind of it's a little bit of a go with the flow. I spend a lot of time like going to other openings and trying to like follow other artists on social media and stuff to make sure that I'm using the space in a way that feels like it's giving a voice to people that really want it and want to share their work with the world.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's great that you're highlighting local artists because, it's one thing I sometimes I think about this. So, how like when you're looking for a new book, it's kind of easy to talk to people and like, especially if okay, this person is in this line of work, they'll probably have some good books or whatever. You can kind of get recommendations. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there. I know there are. Like, I think of myself sometimes, like I know I love art, but sometimes you're like, well, where do I start? Like, how do I figure out who the local artists are? And maybe even then from there, being exposed to them, figure out, actually, I'm really into this type of art or this type of art. And this seems like a great way to do that.
Yeah, I think art and coffee shops have this in common. I think they feel intimidating, right? Like a cup of coffee isn't intimidating, right? Or like looking at a painting isn't intimidating. But walking into a coffee shop where they have drinks that you've never heard of, or like
Yep.
trying to order, there's different vernacular in every space. Like that feels intimidating, right, to a lot of people. And I think if you're not in the art community, like going to an art opening isn't, it doesn't always feel like it's meant for everyone, I think. Like I feel like I beat on this a lot, but I grew up in a very poor blue collar world. And so like art, not I don't know that, had my mom not really like put me in like these private lessons, and like the community center opened that door, but like I didn't always feel like I fit in to, like I've always felt like I teetered between these two different worlds. And so like the idea in both of the spaces, the Cast Gallery and the coffee shop, is really I want to have spaces that feel welcoming to everyone, right? Like so like I want to have a really good cup of coffee that you can drink even if you don't know what a latte is or a cappuccino is, or like, what wave of coffee we're on, or like what single origin means, right? Like if you walk in and order a double double, like we know that you mean two cream and two sugar. We're just going to give you that, right? We're not going to correct
Yeah.
you. And so like if you want to come, that's what I love about the Cats Gallery. It's like it's open Monday through Friday when the building's open, but it's self-guided. Like you go in. So we do openings and like you can come and meet the artist and talk about the work, but like you can just sit in the lobby and look at it. And I like the idea that art is for everyone. Um, and I don't think you have to know what it means to look at it and enjoy it. I think that's like I hate titling my own artwork because or just like putting words to it in general. Like it's for me, it's like when I'm done shooting it and I put it in a frame and I put it on a wall, it doesn't really matter what my experience was with it in a way, right? Like once like you're experiencing it, it's then it's that's maybe the next phase of it. And so having this space is just kind of open to the public. And I think it being in like the lobby makes it feel a little less intimidating. You can just kind of walk in and wander around, and we have information there about the show and the artist and stuff, and we do post on social media. But I really love the idea that art is for everyone, and I think it's been a lot of my mission to try and that's we do art at the coffee shop as well, because it's like I want people to experience beautiful things and thoughtful things and uncomfortable things sometimes too, right?
Yep.
And I that's another like kudos to the Savarino team. Like they don't filter what I show, and it's like it's a commercial residential space. So like you could look at that space and be like, okay, this is a gallery, but it's these things first. So like, and so we've done some like fun stuff there. We've done some like out of the box stuff there, and sometimes it's just pretty photographs, like I did a show when I first took over the gallery. So that was kind of like I showed my work and then moved into curating the space, but it was just like really close-ups of beautiful flowers, so it runs this gamut of things and feelings and emotions. But the goal at the end is to make it feel like it's welcoming for everyone that wants to experience it.
Yeah. Look at you. You seem like, I mean, you're definitely somebody who makes people feel very comfortable. I mean, like you make me feel
Thanks.
comfortable as talking to you, and I think it's important to remember. Like, I mean, like you're saying, going into anything new, but especially something like art, can be very intimidating. And I know you have your own photography company. I've seen you've done. I mean, your work is amazing. You've done a lot of
Thank
different
you.
things. I mean, how do you? I mean, like I'll say this: like when we have to get photos taken for work, I mean, it's to me, it's like so uncomfortable, and like, but
Yeah.
you're relying on the photographer to kind of settle you in and kind of guide you through it. How do you approach that, especially when you're photographing people?
Yeah. I think from personal experience, I hate having my photograph taken.
Same.
And so for many years, I photographed weddings with my friend and long-term business partner, Adam Sarwine, and he would take the most awful photos of me, like at weddings, for like, I was like, he would just like turn his camera and snap, and he'd always catch me. And like in the beginning, it didn't start as an intention to catch me in these like, like my face would be like making these weird faces, or I'd be like bent down getting something in like a weird way. And like, and like at one point, after like a year, I was like, I don't actually look this way, do I? And he was like, no, that's why it's so funny. Like, they were just like awful photos. And like, I think everyone has that experience, right? Like you're more critical of how you look than everyone else. There are certainly bad, I've had bad photos taken of me aside from like Adam's joking photos. Um, and so I think coming from a place, I've always been a little bit overweight, so I've always been a little insecure about like letting someone capture my physical appearance, right? It's very vulnerable to let someone do that. And so I think drawing from that personal experience is how I really can kind of like lock in and make people comfortable. I photograph fairly quickly. I think for me, it's the anticipation of waiting to get my photo taken that really make like I go from like having a nice smile to like this like like because I was in a wedding in New York when I lived there, and I remember at one point the photographer had said to me multiple times like, "Can you do your real smile?" And I was like, I think that I am, right? I'm like doing my best, and pointing me out to a group of people just made me feel way more uncomfortable. And now
Yeah.
so I think moving fairly quickly, knowing what lighting I want and like angles I want to use, um, tends to help. I talk to people a lot, right? So like that, it's like disengaging your thought process from like, oh my God, I'm so uncomfortable. My hair doesn't look right. I didn't lose the 5 pounds I wanted before this photograph. My nose is too big. My eyes are too small. Like all of those things. So like if you can just distract people a little bit, I think that helps make people comfortable. The hardest thing I find to photograph in like the state of like phone selfie photography that we live in is candids. People are so aware of like what's around them now.
Yeah.
Like it's really hard to catch people in like natural moments, right? Like because everyone's so like we're curating our own moments, right? Like we know our angles, we know our lighting, and like that's all well and good. I say like go for it, like get present yourself in the way you want to be presented, but like as like a storyteller when you're trying to capture like these kind of raw, I would say like the moments in between the moments, right? Like
Yeah. Those are the
that
best.
yeah, and that has gotten more challenging in my 20 years of being a photographer, I think for sure. But yeah, I think it's really about making people feel comfortable and like I try and assure people like I'm gonna delete any weird, you're not gonna see them. So like if I'm photographing you and you're like, can I take a look? I usually say no, because the minute you see one and like maybe I don't know, maybe you did make a weird face the first time I clicked the camera, that's all you're gonna think about, right? So it's like there's so much mental thought process in yeah, and it's really we're just vulnerable, right? Like seeing yourself how other people see you is hard and vulnerable.
Yeah. That's honestly, that
Yeah.
resonates with me for sure. And I think it will resonate with most people.
Yeah.
You know, I have a couple more things I want to ask you about, and I think you're a great person to give this type of advice, and you are a great person. What advice would you give to someone who's trying to carve out, like their own creative path, in their hometown? I mean, because obviously you've done it, you have the business, you stay true to yourself as an artist. Like, what kind of advice would you give to somebody who wants to do that?
I think it's such a fine line. Like as an artist, to like sell your work, right? You have to be a business owner at that point, right? But I think like when you stop creating work that you're passionate about or that you're creating for your own kind of drive and start creating work that you think is going to sell or you think like a specific gallery might pick up, I think you lose your authenticity, right? And so, I think that is for me like in every walk of life. Like, and I think it's really hard to stay true to who you are all the time, right? Like it's
Yeah.
but I think as an artist, like that's the thing that from my experience, like as an artist and like working with other artists, like that's the thing that makes work interesting. And again, like it doesn't matter like what your story is, like you have a story. And so like maybe you don't feel like it's special enough or whatever, and like that's just not true, right? Like we all have something interesting and unique. And so I think like moving others out of the frame, right? Like if you're creating to create and it feels good and you're inspired, I think that that creates the best work, whether it's like if you're, some photographers are like current event photographers, right? And so for them, it's like being outside all the time and like being in spaces, right? And like spending time with people, or like, I don't know, if you're a painter, it's like what are you feeling in the moment, and conveying that. And I think again, like knowing that the artwork maybe isn't going to be received, not like once you create it and share it with the world, you lose a layer of control over it, right? And so knowing that that's part of it is hard, right? Like listening to people's opinions about your work is hard.
Yeah.
Um, I always think about like, I did Allentown Art Festival one year and a few other art shows, like those art fair kind of things. And nobody ever likes the work that I is my favorite. Like I will have a table full of work and there's always like one piece that's like, I'm like, oh God, I love this piece. And I over and over and over again, it's like not the piece that people are drawn to. And so like that necessarily never hurt my feelings or anything, but it was just an interesting like lesson in like, like uh we we're all drawn to very different things. So like also not everyone is your audience. Like that's the other thing I think
That's
about
great
often.
advice. Yep.
Yeah, and that's no matter what you're doing, right? Like not everyone is your audience, and when you're trying to appeal to multitudes, like you're probably going to fail, right? Like I think finding, and that doesn't mean you can't have multiple layers of an audience, but finding who your audience is and speaking to them by being authentic to yourself, I think is really the way to be most successful.
I agree. And like lots of times you don't know your audience until you put yourself out there. And
Yeah.
then you realize you're not alone. There's all these people who like what I
Yeah.
do or are like-minded, and then it feels a lot better. You're like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. Okay, so I have one last question for you, and admittedly, it's a little bit off of a play of something that you guys do at Underground. So I know you guys
Okay.
have this program where somebody through the program, it's on your website, you can basically get a coffee cup that's customized, coffee mug with a picture of somebody who's deceased that you would love to have a cup of coffee with, and that's your
Yeah.
cup. I think it's such an awesome concept. So I'm not super original. It's a little bit of a play off this,
That's okay.
but I'm going to add a layer to it. If you
Okay.
could photograph one person, dead or alive, and then sit down and have a cup of coffee with them, who would it be and why?
Ooh, okay. I'm gonna have to think about this for a minute.
Fair enough.
I think that's a great question. While I'm thinking, I will kind of meander a little. So, like, when we came up with the coffee cup concept, it took me a full year to pick mine. Like, we came up with the concept before we opened,
And who would you
and
pick?
I now have five. My
Okay.
original, it's actually behind me. I'll show you. Keep this one at home, but so Diane Arbus is my favorite photographer.
That's awesome.
And so that's who I picked for my first mug. But I have like the woman who was do you remember the Facts of Life?
Yes.
She was like the house mom. She
Yeah.
passed away, so I have her, and then I have Janis Joplin, and but I don't know that those would be my answers for like somebody I could photograph. Um, oh man, this is tough. I'm just thinking of like all of these women that were like amazing moments in history.
It's hard to choose just one, I'm sure.
Yeah. Um,
Who's the first that comes to your mind?
I don't like more recently, I'd probably say like Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
That's a
like
great choice.
yeah, like what a powerhouse she was, and like um the multitudes of like her life and how she like was married, raised children, and then went on to be like the highest court in the land. But like watching, her story, and like her and her husband being in school together, and like, her just picking up the load and all those things, and then moving through like those uncomfortable spaces, right? Like being the first in anything, or among the
It's so
first.
hard. Yep.
Yeah, like you think about just how extra challenging that is, right? And like as a woman in business, like we have a coffee blend, we call it the Notorious RBG. And because like, you know, it wasn't long ago that like women couldn't have a credit card without a man involved or like a bank account. And so like just getting to sit down with her and like talk about that stuff and how she navigated all that. Wait, I want to take my answer back actually.
Okay. Okay.
So the Cass Gallery is named after Mary Cass. And Mary Cass was the CEO of the Effenberg Box Company before women even had the right to vote, and took it to like a national or an international company. So she like scaled them to like this national box company, all while like not having the right to vote still. And so like the sixth floor of 500 Seneca, where the Cass Gallery is, like I photographed before they redid it where her office was. And so like I think I would actually love to meet her and talk to her.
Okay, that's fair enough. You
Yeah.
can have two. You can have two.
Yeah,
They're
okay,
they're
thanks.
both amazing.
I'm terrible at picking. I can't pick favorites either.
That's
Like, if you
okay,
ask me
that's
my
okay.
favorite color, I have like a meltdown. I'm like red, yellow, purple.
No, it's all good. Well, look,
Yeah.
this has been awesome. I really enjoyed speaking with you. I'm sure everybody's going to love hearing more about you, and I just
you.
really appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. And you know, I've actually been to your law firm. We've catered for you a few times.
I know you guys have done an amazing job.
Yeah, and so my business partner Bridget does all our catering, but every once in a while I take the deliveries. And so your space is beautiful. I love it. And
I appreciate it. Yeah, we're pretty close to the old First Ward. You know, we Seneca in Michigan. It was the old Seneca plumbing warehouse that we turned into a law office. So it's pretty cool. But yeah, next time you're there, make sure you say hello, because I know everyone loves when we get a cater from you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to hearing it all put together.
All right, looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Angles. If this episode made you think, smile, or see something in a new way, follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a review and share it with friends. You can also follow us on social media. Angles is produced by Brett Tuttle. I'm John Richmond. See you next time.